Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. For 2 days following the crash of the Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 in eastern Ukraine, corpses still litter the ground. Finally, the bodies were bagged up and piled on a train by masked, hooded men. It was a crime scene run by the criminals. The very outlaws who committed the crimes controlled the area. Evidence indicates that Russian separatists trained by the Russian military used a sophisticated Russian anti-aircraft missile system to shoot down the flight MH17. In the weeks preceding the event, Ukrainian separatists had been receiving a lot of new gadgets from Uncle Vladimir. On Face the Nation, Secretary of State John Kerry said that a few weeks ago, U.S. intelligence watched a 150-vehicle convoy coming from Russia going into the east of Ukraine with tanks, artillery, multiple rocket launchers, armored personnel carriers turned over to the separatists. Included was at least one SA-11 surface-to-air missile launching system. Kerry said, "We know they had an SA-11 right in the vicinity hours before this shoot. We know that the separatists have shot down 12 aircraft in the last couple of months, among them 2 transport planes. We have video of a standard SA-11 mobile missile system driving across the borders into Russia about 4 hours after the Malaysian flight was shot down. The vehicle had 2 SA-11 missiles missing. To be accurate, the separatists apparently did not understand what kind of plane they were shooting at this time. Colonel Igor Strelkov calls himself the military commander of the People's Republic of Donetsk. On his website, Strelkov announced the shooting of a plane moments after Flight 17 went down. In the Torets region, they have destroyed an AN-26 transport plane. Its wreckage landed near the Progress mine. This will teach them, do not fly in our skies. The bird fell on open fields. It did not damage inhabited sectors. Peaceful people did not suffer. But it was not a transport plane, and peaceful people did suffer. 295 of them and their families and loved ones. A few minutes later, the rebels realized what they had done. Strelkov deleted his post about downing the plane. Other rebels radioed their masters in Russia to find out what to do next. They did not know that the Ukrainian government was monitoring the call and would send it to YouTube, in effect giving it to the world. It has since been verified by U.S. intelligence. A Russian official asks, "Well, what do you have there?" The separatist replies, "In short, it was 100% a passenger aircraft." The Russians ask, "Is there anything left of the weapon?" The separatists, "Absolutely nothing. Civilian items, medical stuff, towels, toilet paper." A second separatist interrupts, "There are a lot of corpses of women and children." From this, it's obvious that the separatists shot down the plane and that Russia was complicit. Russia gave weapons to the thugs, then showed them how to use those weapons. This could have enormous repercussions on the world. Before the shooting, Russia was already having a tough time recruiting separatist fighters in the Ukraine. They were losing battles. In recent weeks, the Ukrainian government had seized back half of the land previously taken by the rebels. In response, Russia had been sending more arms and more special forces into the Ukraine, and they had been massing more troops on the border. Since the shoot-down, Russia has been pulling people and weapons out of Ukraine. Putin may decide that the eastern Ukraine is not worth the trouble, or he may just be pulling back until things cool down. I suspect he will continue his effort to rebuild the old Soviet sphere of influence in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. a sphere of influence that more and more mirrors the coalition of nations described in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39. If Europe and the United States further isolate Putin, it may push him to go ahead with plans already in the works to make a multi-billion-dollar trade agreement with Iran. Russia would receive Iranian oil in exchange for goods and services, including the nuclear equipment and know-how. This would make both Russia and Iran less vulnerable to Western sanctions and more dangerous in every way to Israel and the Western world, just as the prophets predicted. Israel's conflict against Hamas, known as Operation Protective Edge, has escalated dramatically in recent days. Last weekend, 13 soldiers from an elite Israeli Defense Forces unit were killed during an operation to eliminate Hamas' network of underground tunnels. Two of the casualties were also American citizens serving in the Israeli army. Gary Bauer observed that proportionately it would be the equivalent of 500 U.S. soldiers being killed in one battle. Last week, I noted that more than 1,000 rockets had been raining down on Israel from Gaza in just the previous 2 weeks. However, it is becoming increasingly clear that the greater danger may be found in the complex of terror tunnels that Hamas had constructed in Gaza over the last few years. There are dozens of these incredibly sophisticated tunnels. They are strengthened with reinforced concrete, fortified, and some dug as deep as 100 feet. Some of them originate beneath apartment buildings in the middle of Gaza. Some open up underneath mosques. One senior IDF officer described the tunnels as almost entirely hidden on the surface and as elaborate as a labyrinth. The recent fighting has been particularly fierce because apparently the IDF was getting close to discovering a nexus of the tunnel complex in a suburb outside Gaza City. Hamas is desperate to protect these tunnels, so they threw everything they had at the Israelis. We've known for years that Hamas has used tunnels between Gaza and Egypt to smuggle in weapons and rockets and to smuggle people out. Israel has routinely destroyed these tunnels upon discovery, but these are tunnels of different caliber and purpose. Hamas fighters use the tunnels to move from Gaza into Israel to ambush and, if they can, kidnap Israeli soldiers. Many observers fear that Hamas is planning to use the tunnels to launch major terror attacks inside Israel. Israeli soldiers thwarted at least 2 such attacks early in this week. One party included 13 terrorists. Early in the week, Israel had already located 14 tunnels into Israel with almost 40 access points. It's critical to remember that even though Gaza is only a quasi-state, it is still a formidable enemy. The simple fact that Hamas denies Israel's right to exist and is fully committed to the point of death to the absolute annihilation of Israel makes it even more lethal. It has the backing of several terrorist-supporting nations that supplied it with funds as well as highly developed rockets, missiles, mortars, and other weapons. It has received hundreds of millions of dollars from the West, which it has used to develop its arsenals and fortify infrastructure. Add to the mix that it feels no need to observe globally accepted conventions of war, and in many ways, fighting Hamas becomes even more dangerous than fighting an established state. Pile on the top of this the fact that the vast majority of the world's media refuses to communicate the truth and instead regurgitates Hamas propaganda, and it's easy to see that Israel is fighting for its life on several fronts. For instance, one internet headline reads, "Israel kills for the fun of it. Their foreign military policy equals pure sadism." The writer of the article, labeled Operation Protective Edge, just one example of a general policy of terror carried out by the Israelis against the people of Gaza. He's right about one thing. This is an example of terrorism against the people of Gaza, but not from the Israelis, rather from Hamas. Even the New York Times, with its anti-Israel bent, acknowledges that the militants of Hamas and its affiliates fire rockets into Israel with little regard for how the response affects Gazans. The United Nations, which is no friend of Israel, says they found 20 rockets in a school they run in Gaza. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency said in a statement, UNRWA strongly condemns the group of groups responsible for placing the weapons in one of its installations. This is a flagrant violation of the inviolability of its premises under international law. While the UN sees it as a violation of the inviolable, Hamas sees it as a standard operating procedure. Hamas is willing to hide behind women and children, behind the sick and the elderly. The hate-filled Hamas agenda reveals itself most clearly in the shameful disregard for the people it claims to protect. Egypt tried to broker a ceasefire. Israel immediately accepted their proposal, but Hamas refused. Hamas spokesman Hassan Badran said to accept the Egyptian ceasefire would be the same as surrender to Israel. This again raises the question, with their lives being daily devoured by Hamas malevolence, why do the inhabitants of Gaza continue to vote for Hamas at every opportunity? Well, it's probably because of decades of indoctrination of their children in hating Israel. And it seems that whoever is most aggressive against Israel is the one you vote for, no matter what else they're guilty of. Human Rights Watch is a well-known rights advocacy group. It issued this statement. Israeli air attacks in Gaza investigated by Human Rights Watch have been targeting apparent civilian structures and killing civilians in violation of the laws of war. Israel should end unlawful attacks that do not target military objectives and may be intended as collective punishment or broadly to destroy civilian property. Deliberate or reckless attacks violating the laws of war are war crimes. That sounds pretty definitive until you investigate HRW a little closer. In July 2009, the Wall Street Journal reported a delegation from Human Rights Watch was recently in Saudi Arabia to investigate the mistreatment of women under Saudi law, to campaign for the rights of homosexuals subject to death penalty in Saudi Arabia, to protest the lack of religious freedom in Saudi Kingdom, to issue a report on Saudi political prisoners. No, 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 and no. The delegation arrived to raise money from wealthy Saudis by highlighting HRW's demonization of Israel. This so-called human rights group was so proud of their anti-Israeli bent that they were willing to go to Saudi Arabia and raise money on it. Yet, the media pays attention when they accuse Israel of targeting non-military installations. They claim Israel is targeting apparent civilian structures and killing civilians in violation of laws of war. They even accuse Israel of war crimes. But Israel only targets houses containing weapons, map rooms, and command and control centers. If Israel cannot hit such houses, then it cannot fight back and would have no way to stop the ongoing missile onslaught from Hamas. The right to self-defense is an inherent human right, and any organization that denies that right should never call itself a watchdog for human rights. I'll be right back.